So chapter 2 sections 11 and 12 we're going to cover in this recording. Section 11 looks at operations management, section 12 looks in a bit more detail at human resource management. Okay, so first of all, to start off, we've got a definition here of operations management, operations and production management. And essentially operations management is thinking about the design, implementation and control of our processes in order that we can create, as required, the goods or services that the business is engaged in supplying to customers. So we're essentially saying, let's take our resources, our inputs, and transform them into our outputs. And anything to do with that, we could deem to be part of the operations management. Underneath there then we've got a table just going through what we call the 4 V's of operations. And the 4 V's of operations just take us through 4 different areas or dimensions whereby operations management can differ. And the differences between these 4 dimensions will really dictate how our operation is organized and managed. So we've got the 4 V's here: volume, variety, variation in demand, and visibility. So volume. If I've got a high volume, so if I'm making lots and lots of units, for example, say I've got my toy car factory and I'm making tens of thousands of these toy cars every month, I would expect that to be relatively capital intensive. So I've got lots of machinery that does lots of work, very little manual labor in the sense of kind of hand crafting. I'd expect all of my staff to be relatively specialized, and because I'm making so many, I'd expect my unit cost to be relatively low. So all of those kind of capital costs, all of those kind of overheads split nicely across lots and lots of different units. However, if I had low volume, I'd expect my staff to be able to do more than one thing. So it's not really practical to have one employee, for example, to put this kind of small rubber tires onto my toy car. If I'm only making 10 toy cars a month, I'd expect my employees to be able to kind of make the entire car and package it up and so on. Because I'm making less, we're not achieving those kind of economies of scale savings, so I'd expect to have higher costs per unit. Variety relates then to what I do, so the range of products, for example, that we might produce. If I've got a high variety, it means that I'm going to have to be flexible in what I do. I can't set up a machine to produce the same toy car over and over and over. I may have to kind of change my machine setup every few hours to make a different type of toy car. And again, because of that complexity, I'd expect my unit cost to be relatively high. If I've got pretty low variety, again, I'm just making one thing over and over and over and over again. I don't need to be flexible. I can be nice and standardized, and again, that should hopefully translate to low unit costs. Variation in demand essentially relates to kind of seasonality. So if I've got an ice cream factory, I might expect my demand to be higher in the summer than in the winter, and that's going to then lead to certain problems. So if I've got high variation, it means that my demand goes up and down across the period. I might end up with what we call capacity utilization problems. So perhaps I need a very large factory because in the summer I make lots and lots of ice cream, but that then means in the winter months I have a big factory that's relatively empty. If, however, I've got low variation in demand, and if I were to plot, for example, demand over a period, it moves relatively little, I can then make sure, well, as long as I can make this many ice creams over the period, or this many biscuits, or something that doesn't have such a variation in demand, then I can make sure that I'm utilizing, say, 90% of my factory at all times. Finally, we've got visibility, and this relates to how visible the actual operation is in terms of our customers. So imagine a restaurant or 2 restaurants, and in one restaurant you have the kitchen kind of downstairs out of the way, and you bring your food up in a lift, and in the other restaurant you've got a nice open kitchen and you can see everything that goes on in there. So you might need to consider the interaction between the customer and the chefs, or the customer and the kitchen staff in the restaurant that has a nice open plan kitchen. And again, because of that, because you're essentially going to need better staff, kind of not just staff that can cook but staff that can interact and behave well, that's likely to be more expensive. If, however, you've got the issue where your restaurant or your kitchen's downstairs, it might be a bit cheaper because you don't have to have any contact between your staff and the customer. 11.2 then has a brief look at R&D. So R&D, our research and development, is where I'm going to get my new products and my new ideas from. We split R&D into a few categories just so we can understand exactly what those excuse me, what those terms cover. So for example, we include what we call pure research. So pure research is where you're carrying out research to try and find some sort of new knowledge, and in kind of pure research, so we're looking for new knowledge, and there's no obvious commercial link in place at this time. So there's no obvious commercial use. So I'm not specifically looking at something in the idea that I'm going to be able to use it to sell something. Applied research, on the other hand, is where we now have an obvious commercial or practical use in mind. Okay. And then development is where we take some of that new knowledge that we might have obtained through pure or applied research to actually develop something new, so a new product or system. Okay. You can also split those two or research generally into product and process research, and as they suggest, product research is where you're trying to find new products, and process research is where you're trying to find better ways of doing things. Over the page then, finally in the operations management section, we've got procurement. And procurement is just ensuring that we have the right goods and services, we're paying the best possible price for them, we're buying the right quantity, the right quality, the right time, at the right place, from the right source or the right supplier in order to benefit the business. So we're making sure we're buying the right products in terms of quantity, so the right amount, we're not overstocking, we're not understocking, the right quality, so the required quality for my product, we have them in the right place and the right time for me to use them, and we buy them from the right source, maybe a nice reliable supplier. When you're thinking about which supplier to use then, so for example at work you may have an approved supplier list, and there's a few things you need to consider. So for example, quantity, are they able to provide the correct quantity to you? Are they able to supply goods that are the right quality? Obviously price is a key one too, and then lead time, so how long is it going to take for those goods to arrive? The danger for most businesses is focusing on price, and then you might jeopardize other parts of your procurement mix. Finally, for this recording then, we'll have a think about human resource. Human resource is obviously the process around managing our human aspects, our employees. We've got a definition here of human resource management. Now the kind of traditional approach to human resource is to think of it almost as payroll, but actually human resource is much wider than that. So we've got the creation, the development and the maintenance of an effective workforce. So we create the workforce, we recruit, we develop the workforce, and we maintain that with adequate rewards, for example. Now it's not a great idea to do that in isolation. We need to make sure that actually we're referring to the requirements of the business. So what does our business stand for? What are our overall strategic objectives? And also that we're responding to the environment. So am I keeping up to date with latest techniques? Am I responding to my competitors' actions? We've got a couple of different approaches to human resource management, and these essentially are one nice kind of cuddly approach and one approach where we treat kind kind of the human resource as a resource. So the hard approach is where we think about the resource element. So we think about what we need, when we need it, and we fill that gap. The idea then is to get the absolute maximum out of my employees and make sure that I'm keeping my staff costs as low as possible. The soft approach emphasizes the human element. So we're worried about, well, are my employees happy? Are they developing? Are they kind of enjoying a high level of welfare in terms of rewards, in terms of working environment, and so on? So two different approaches. And again, there tends not to be a right way. A good approach for most businesses will be a combination of those two approaches. Now, if you were going to try and decide how effective your human resource management process was, there's obviously a variety of ways in which you can do that. The 4Cs model gives us an indication or a program to do that. So a nice map to say, well, how good is my human resource management overall? So we use the 4Cs, as the name suggests. So we've got commitment, competence, congruence, and cost effectiveness. So firstly, how motivated are our employees? So are they going the extra mile? Are they staying late? Are they coming up with good ideas? What are our satisfaction surveys like? Are they coming back positive? Competence relates to skills and abilities then, so not just good enough to think about happiness, it's also obviously important to think about how good our employees are. Congruence is all about a shared vision, so we need to make sure that everyone's singing from the same page. And then finally, we always come back to cost at the end and making sure that I'm getting the most out of what I put in, so my efficiency levels are high. That's the end of this recording then. So coming up next in the recording following will be chapter 2, section 13, so thinking about organizational behavior.